She had a membership card. I didn't ask her about it because I kind of don't want to ask her about it. When I saw that card that first time, though, I pulled my phone out and I looked up the group that was on the card, and the ADL identifies them as a hate group. The ADL. So they're a certified hate group. I forgot the name of the group, but they did have the Celtic cross with the White Pride Worldwide on it.
This is the Q Dropped podcast. Stories of relationships torn apart by QAnon. One thing that we've learned doing this podcast is that people have loved ones caught up in all kinds of extremism. And the stories are so similar to those who have loved ones sucked into QAnon. You've already heard one of them in episode 2 of season 2 of the Q Dropped podcast, in which April, a former Marine, was cut out of her MAGA father's will for essentially being a Democrat. Most recently, we heard from our guest today, Nova, whose mother is not QAnon. She's not MAGA. Hell, she doesn't even like Donald Trump. Nova's mom makes those things look like no big deal. Unfortunately for Nova, her mom has been sucked into the online white supremacist culture, and it's bleeding into her real life. She's destroyed important relationships over it, she's been doxxed for it, and she's probably gotten herself trapped in an abusive relationship for it. Nova's mom believes in all the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories from the Rothschilds to the Jewish space lasers and beyond. But it's the way she treats her family that is truly and unforgivably despicable. But before we jump into it, I just want to remind you that you can get an ad-free version of this episode on Patreon. The link is in our show notes. When you sign up, you'll also get access to bonus clips from all of our episodes, as well as updates about my own QAnon family members. In one, I shared an email my mom had sent me making predictions that, of course, never came true. So hop onto Patreon at the link in the show notes and enjoy all of our bonus content. Also, we wanted to ask that if you're enjoying this podcast, please rate and review it. We get a lot of listens and a lot of downloads, but we don't have many reviews. So let us know how we're doing. There's a trigger warning for this episode. You're going to hear a lot of references to racism, transphobia, homophobia, and sexual assault. So if you're sensitive to these things, you might want to skip this episode. Nova is a 25-year-old woman in Chicago.
I've lived in Chicago my whole life. I guess right now we're living in like a West Chicago suburb, but it's Chicago. It's the same county. It's like I walk across the street and that's technically Chicago and this technically isn't. But when I was growing up, we lived like squarely on the south side of Chicago.
Growing up on the south side of Chicago made for some interesting times, but it was Nova's parents that were truly different.
They're not typical parents, I would say. My dad was in the hardcore Chicago punk scene for a long time. He had a punk band, and that's kind of just, as you can see, I have a Sonic Youth shirt on, so it's like that obviously rubbed off on me in ways. So I'm pretty into that music too myself, and that's just kind of what my life was like. And my mom was less of a punk; she was a metalhead.
Nova lived with her dad.
He had custody of me my whole life. I never really lived with my mom, and there are periods of my life where I didn't really see her a lot. It's really complicated. I know my dad gets really emotional about it because he's like, he'll like if you talk to him about the divorce at all, like the first thing he's going to get really upset about is how my mom just didn't really seem to care. Like it didn't even really seem like she wanted to have custody of me. The times I did see my mom, sometimes it was kind of strange. Like she had her fads with conspiracy theories. It was always a different type. Like she was always on aliens. Aliens were always a thing for her.
Unlike many of our interviewees, Nova's parents were not religious.
She was very staunchly atheist. And I wasn't really like religious at all. Like I wasn't raised by anybody religious. So I was kind of in the dark about what religion even was for a long time in my life. And when I found out that being an atheist was an option, I'm like, yeah, that's me. That's what I am. And she was very proud about that. She was very happy about it. And we would kind of make fun of people like the Westboro Baptist Church for being homophobic. We would make fun of pro-life people all the time. I was like in 8th grade at this point, and I kind of started to understand what some of the current happenings were at that age. And one that was kind of big somewhere along the line was the Proposition 8 thing. And we were making fun of people who were in support of that Proposition 8 all the time, which is in stark contrast to what's going on now.
For Nova's mom, conspiracy theories and worldviews like QAnon seem to be just the beginning.
She was always an Alex Jones fan. And my dad was too, but my dad really fell off of it. Like, he doesn't really listen to that anymore. There were some days where I questioned, like, she would pick me up and we would go somewhere and she would have Alex Jones on in the car. And I'm like 10 to 13 years old. And I knew that whatever was coming out of this guy's mouth was absolutely insane. And I've often questioned, I'm like, why in the world does my mom listen to this guy? Like, there was a day where Alex Jones was going off about how there's atheists in the government and that means there's Satanism in the government and that's bad, that's evil or whatever. And I'm like, well, she's an atheist and I am too. Like, what does she think about that? It's like, I don't understand what she's getting out of Alex Jones if this is the kind of stuff he's talking about.
Nova spoke to me about her mom's profession, and it was only when she was talking about her mom's work that she sounded proud of her mom.
She's a paramedic. I'm not going to diss what kind of job she works because the job she works, very few people can actually work that job. She would work 24-hour shifts dealing with gunshot victims in the south side of Chicago. Like, that's insane. Like, to really take on that task, that's not anything to shake at.
But when she wasn't working, things were weird. Even as a small child, Nova understood that most of what her mom said was insane.
We were at, like, the zoo. I was, like, in 5th grade. I was, like, 11 years old. And I got a Pepsi. And she tells me that Pepsi has aborted fetuses in it. And I'm like, well, it tastes pretty good. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, well, no, it doesn't. I'm like, no, it doesn't. How do you put an aborted fetus in Pepsi? Like, I think I might be able to see it in the Pepsi, maybe, if it's in there. Do they just, like, crush it up to where it's like, there's no rationality. I have no idea where she heard that conspiracy theory from. No idea. I've never heard anybody ever say something like that again. She had the alien phases. She had these, like, health fad phases where she was, like, super into everything's got to be gluten-free, everything's got to be non-GMO, everything's got to be, like, fish oil or some other kind of oil. It got to the point where I remember I was, like, 6 years old and I had a really bad cough. It could have just been, like, a seasonal, like, thing. It happens. You get sick sometimes. And she's like, I'm going to get you an oil. And she pulls out this oil. I have no idea what kind of oil it was, but it kind of had this earthy smell. It might have probably been an essential oil. And she just put it on my chest. And I got a horrible rash from it. I was allergic to it. And it's like, clearly that didn't work. You know, maybe I just needed some cough medicine instead, Mom.
Nova paid attention and began to notice a disconcerting pattern.
Slowly over time, she started to get into all these, like, Jewish conspiracies. And I noticed that she had these really strange books around the house whenever I would go over there. She had, like, this Ann Coulter book, I think it was. And it's, like, a book about how the Jews are bad or whatever. It, like, the title was very upfront about what the book was about.
Even the music she listened to was concerning.
Punk and metal have, like, a really long and upsetting history with, like, white supremacist groups and everything. And I can kind of see how, like, that stuff started for her. Like, she definitely was into these really, I guess I'm just going to say, really fucked up bands. And, you know, I guess a really good example is like Varg Vikernes from Burzum. She's like a big fan of that guy, and that dude is known for like burning down churches and stuff and being like an outright racist white supremacist.
When Nova was a teen, she found herself forced to live with her mom for the first time.
I ended up like living with her for 2 years. I did. And it was for a couple complicated reasons that's kind of unrelated. Long story short, I had a stepmom for a minute, and this stepmom wanted me out of that house. So I kind of just took refuge with my mom, and I didn't really see my mom like at all growing up. So it was kind of like a new thing for me to be around her every day and really get a grasp for what her life is like. There were days where I would just come downstairs to get a glass of water, and she would say something crazy like, "What are you going to do when Black Lives Matter?" Like, she would say something actually racist, like a slur or something. I'm not going to say that here, but, you know, she would say, "What would you do when Black Lives Matter is coming down the streets and they're going to break in and, you know, you don't have any guns or anything?" I'm like, "No, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to use the bathroom. Like, I just woke up. I don't know what you're talking about." I mean, I also got a really good grasp of how, like, out of control her own life is, because our house was a wreck. Like, it's a bad sign when my room is the cleanest room in the house. Like, that's not good. I mean, as soon as my dad divorced this stepmom of mine, I was like, I'm coming right back. I'm coming right back. That was the only reason why I left in the first place. So I ended up kind of just leaving my mom. And in the time that I left my mom, it seemed like everything just like immediately spiraled into complete insanity.
Up until now, Nova's mother had kept her strange ideas behind closed doors. But soon after Nova moved back in with her dad, it began to manifest in other, far more public ways.
I came over one day. I think this was like the first time I really recognized something was like not good. She was at the computer and she was rambling about how she made a sign, like a protest sign. I'm like, oh, what is this about? So she shows me a video that she made, and she posted it on YouTube, and it's her holding up this sign, and she's in front of a building in Chicago that's owned by a Jewish person. I don't remember what building it is. I really don't care to know what building it is. All I know is that that was her justification. And the sign said some crazy stuff about Israel or whatever. I have no idea. It was some crazy Jewish conspiracy that she got herself wrapped up into. And I'm like, why is she doing this? And in the video, it was funny because somebody walked by her and just said, "You're crazy," like very audibly picked up in her video, "You're crazy." And I'm like, yes, that person's right. Like, he's right. You are crazy.
Another time, Nova found something deeply concerning at her mother's home.
She had a membership card. I didn't ask her about it because I kind of don't want to ask her about it. She had a membership card. I don't have the picture I took of it anymore. I deleted it because it was just making me angry. When I saw that card that first time, though, I pulled my phone out and I looked up the group that was on the card. And the ADL identifies them as a hate group. The ADL. So they're a certified hate group. I forgot the name of the group. But they did have the Celtic cross with the White Pride Worldwide on it.
The group that Nova couldn't remember was Stormfront, whose motto is White Pride Worldwide. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, Stormfront was created by former Alabama Klan boss and longtime white supremacist Don Black in 1995. Stormfront was the first major hate site on the internet, claiming more than 300,000 registered members as of May 2015, although far fewer remain active. The site has been a very popular online forum for white nationalists and other racial extremists. Stormfront hosts news articles that often contain racial slurs and derogatory language and push harmful stereotypes about non-white people. There's also a place where members can take part in discussion threads about topics such as, what do you think should be done about the Jews? There's no other way to interpret it. Nova's mom was a full-fledged white supremacist, and Nova didn't quite know how to handle it. Things just continued to get worse.
Now my mom is showing me the Happy Merchant meme. I don't know if you've ever seen that one, but it was flooded all over like early 2010s 4chan, where it's just like It's like from some white supremacist newspaper from the 90s, but on the internet, they just cropped the racist caricature of a Jewish guy, and then it just got like blown into meme status on 4chan. And she's showing me that. I'm like, why do you know about that? Like, what? And she's asking me if I know what it means to like, I'm like, that's 4chan. Like, what are you on 4chan? What's going on here? Not everybody on 4chan is like that, but there is a culture on there that is like that. And why in the world is my mom knowing about it? Like, there's no reason that she should know what that stuff is. She's in her 40s. She should go do 40-year-old mom things like sewing, you know, and working her job, and or whatever. Not 4chan memes that I recognize from Gamergate.
Nova's mom began talking to an internet user by the name of Handsome Truth.
And his videos were about approaching Black people on the street and intimidating them and asking them about Black Lives Matter. And he's like, do you support Black Lives Matter? And they're like, yeah, sure. Yeah. And they're clearly not wanting to be on camera. And then he gets in their face and starts saying racist shit to them. And he's just harassing people on the street. This is someone my mom thinks like needs to be protected. Like, protect this guy from someone who's BLM and Antifa, which according to her definition of being BLM and Antifa is just not liking Adolf Hitler.
Handsome Truth was born John Eugene Minadeo II and is a prolific content creator in online white supremacist spaces. He's the founder of a hate group that pushes anti-Semitic conspiracy theories called Goyim Defense League. Minadeo comes from a Mexican-American family, which makes his white supremacist activity even more baffling. Oddly, he's also a rapper. Yes, a white supremacist rapper, because I guess he appreciates irony. Shooby Da Wop is his rapper name, and yeah, his music sucks. I listened for about 4 seconds total, and I can still feel the secondhand embarrassment. Nova's mom is around my age, and I'm in my mid-40s, and she's hanging with terminally online white supremacist cringe rappers who refuse to accept that they're not all white. Sadly, Nova and her half-brother, who is transgender, were constantly exposed to content like this when they were around their mom.
I kind of got a glimpse of what kind of content she likes, because she had a habit of, when I come over, she would intentionally put a hate speech video on. And depending on what person it is that's in her space, it's a different type of hate speech video. Because while I've personally always kind of seen myself as an only child because of how I grew up, I do have a half brother that's lived with my mom forever, like for his whole life. And he's trans. So when he's around, it's anti-LGBTQ hate and like really extreme versions of it. Like, it's like straight up like these people should be killed kind of content that she's listening to. And when I come over, it's anti-feminist content. Like, she puts on videos that are like in the title say MGTOW, it'll say MRA, it'll say incel.
MGTOW, or MGTOW, stands for Men Going Their Own Way. And it sounds like a harmless group promoting the well-being of men, but it's anything but that. It is instead an online community known for its hostility toward women. MRAs are men's rights activists, which again has an innocent enough sounding name, but when you look past that, it's all ugliness and hatred aimed at cutting down the feminist movement. I wish this was as bad as it got with Nova's mom, but it's not.
She did brag to me once about how she went to a white power rally. It was something called the Fash Bash, you know, like fascism. That's the Fash Bash. And she told me like it was a brag, like she just met Leonardo DiCaprio, some famous celebrity or something. She told me she met the son or someone related to George Lincoln Rockwell. And I'm like, George Lincoln Rockwell. She explained to me who that guy was immediately. She's like, yeah, he ran the hate bus in the 1970s. Oh, the hate bus. Very, very lovely, Mom. Very nice. I hope you took a great picture with whoever that was. But this is, to her, that's to brag about, like to brag, meeting someone related to George Lincoln Rockwell. Like, at first, I thought she meant she met him himself, but that's not possible because he's, like, dead. Thank God. But he has, like, a relative of his, probably one of his kids, that, like, carries on the hate bus or whatever. And he was at the Fash Bash, and my mom was so excited to meet this guy and bragged to me that she met him. And she's like, I have his books. I'm like, great, cool, whatever. You have his books. I'm sure those books are fucking fascinating.
George Lincoln Rockwell was a little man who fancied himself the New World's answer to Hitler. He was the founder of the American Nazi Party. He was a Holocaust denier, frequently referred to Hitler as a savior, and had views about Jewish people and Black people that I refuse to repeat. Lincoln was later shot and killed by one of his ex-buddies, John Patsalos, who later left the neo-Nazi movement behind and has been outspoken in condemning it. In 1961, the Freedom Riders were African-American activists who rode public buses to protest the segregation of this type of transportation. In retaliation, George Lincoln Rockwell bought a bus, named it the Hate Bus, and plastered it with white supremacist mottos. I'm not quite sure what this was meant to achieve, but really, what can we expect from these folks? They're not exactly known for their intellectual, let's call it, prowess. It seems like Nova's mom was inspired by these heroes of hers and wanted to make a name for herself in the online white supremacist community. She launched YouTube channels and posted anti-Semitic content.
I don't think her YouTube channel is around anymore. Like, I caught on to what her username was, and I very recently, like, when you offered to interview me, I actually went out of my way, like, let me see if it's still around, and there's nothing that came up. I mean, it could still be on there. The name of her channel is very outright deliberate, like that it's an anti-Semitic channel, so maybe that could be why it didn't show up in a search result, or it could just have been nuked off of YouTube. One of those two things, and that's why I didn't find it. But that doesn't mean her internet presence is, completely gone. Like, she's actually very wrapped up. Like, she's probably on some other website, because there's tons of websites that you can use now. You have, like, the political boards on 4chan and 8chan that people use. You have websites like BitChute, Parler, Rumble, Trump's version of Twitter.
The further Nova's mom was sucked into her white supremacy nonsense, the more hateful she would become to her family.
She's also said some pretty wild things to us directly. And that's where things started to get really ugly because, I tell my mom things that have happened to me in my life. I was finally being like, okay, I recognize that these things happened to me when I was younger. I was being abused by my neighbor, our next door neighbor, who, was just being let to run rampant. Like, he also abused my aunt when she was a kid and living in that house. And nobody questioned it. Nobody said anything. And I'm kind of finally growing up and being like, I got to start saying something about that. And I'd also gone through, like, one of my dad's ex-girlfriends was kind of like a Munchausen's by proxy type of person, and she caught on to the fact that I was abused. This woman that was with my dad caught on to me being abused by my neighbor, and she projected her own trauma onto me and did her own type of abuse. And I told my mom about that. I'm like, I wanted to know if you noticed anything when I was younger. And, she kind of latched on to something I told her. And later on, she would use it against me in a way I never thought she would. I asked her, like, I want to make a Halloween costume. I'm going to do something fun this year for once. And we went to Joann's. And while we were at Joann's, I heard something that really, like, disappointed me. And this was when COVID was still, like, people needed to wear a mask or else you'd be asked to leave a store and stuff like that. It wasn't as lax as it is now. So we were in there. I had my mask on. And there was a group of, like, these soccer mom types not wearing masks, kind of crowded around, and the one soccer mom was like, everybody's so offended these days, and they're trying to force the LGBTQ XYZ into our schools. And she's like, that's why we need our guns. And the other two soccer moms are just nodding like, yeah, we need our guns to protect ourselves from the LGBT. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, well, I have my little, my bi pin here. I have it on my bag. And it's like, they could recognize that. And that's scary to me. So I said something about it when we were leaving the store. And my mom's like, I agree with them. Like, we need to do something about the gay people. And I'm like, you realize that I'm bisexual? And she told me that the only reason why I'm bisexual is because I was abused as a kid. And that makes me a degenerate. She said I'm participating in degeneracy. And I'm like, what in the world are you talking about? Like, you're using something that I had no control over, and it has really affected my life as a weapon to get at me. And it was really upsetting. Like, we just kind of got back, and I just gave up on the whole charade. Like, I'm just gonna take my stuff home and just go. Like, I'm not even gonna go in there because I guess I'm just a degenerate. That's pretty much just what I said to her, and I left.
Her mother would continue to use this as a way to cut Nova down.
My experiences, like being abused, she says that's why you're bisexual, and both of those things are degenerate. Like, you're wrong for being a victim, and you're wrong for being bisexual related to that. That's how I took it. That's how I took it. Like, that's what it felt to me for her telling me I'm participating in degeneracy. It's so irrational because I told her, I'm like, there's people who are gay and have not been abused. And she tells me that those people are just lying. Like, go ask any gay person. They're all abused as children. Every single one of them. If they're telling you that they're not, then they're lying. And it's like, that's just irrationality again. It's just like confirmation bias. And it's like, if something doesn't fit the narrative, then that means it's just fake. It's not real. When I tell her, like, hey, it's hate speech, what you're promoting, she just goes, no, it's a mental illness. It's a mental illness. And transgender people they're mentally ill. And they don't need anybody to feed into that. And she goes on about how at her job, when she has a patient who's schizophrenic, they don't do anything to give into a delusion or an episode. They just want to focus on, keeping them alive. And she says, it's the same thing. Like, it's the same thing with them. And I'm like, well, number one, you're not a psychologist. I mean, you're just a paramedic. Like, a paramedic is not a psychologist. They're not therapists. They're not a psychiatrist. They don't know anything about these things. They only tell you to do that in the case of a person with schizophrenia because your only job is to just keep them alive. Like, honestly. And it's not the same with a transgender person. Like, with a transgender person, it's not a delusion.
Nova's mom has made some interesting new friends in her newfound community.
She has some guy that she met through a white supremacist group living with her. She sold her house. She has a new house. He lives with her. His son lives with her. She divorced my stepdad. She threw him and his dad out of the house. I've met this guy a couple times, and he's like, he's a child. He's a child. He's a very emotionally insecure person, but he wants to act like he's not. So he latches on to a lot of this white supremacist stuff. And the way I found out that he was even a thing in the first place was kind of its own ordeal, where she came over one night, I think to pick up my half-brother because he was, kind of just lonely and hung out at my house for a little bit. And she came over pretty late at night, and she had this dude on speakerphone. And the most insane thing I've ever heard in my life came out of that phone. So this guy is going on about how the term man cave is a feminist conspiracy to oppress men by making them own only one room in the house. So I'm like, what in the world is he talking about? I'm just like so flabbergasted that my mom is talking to this guy, and it's like in my house right now. So I go up to the phone and I'm like, what? Like, I just say the first thing that comes to my head. I'm like, are you like some kind of like MRA or whatever? And he got really defensive immediately. He's like, oh, no. What do you have a problem with what I have to say? Are you a radical feminist? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Yeah. You want to get you want to debate about it? I mean, I think that makes a lot more sense than whatever in the world it is that you're saying right now. He believes that the 19th Amendment should be repealed. I shouldn't have a right to work. I shouldn't have a right to vote. I shouldn't have a right to anything. Tells me that to my face. Tells me that gay people should be killed outright. He knew I was bi. He thinks that we should just be murdered. He told me that the only good thing that Islam does is kill gay people. And I think the cherry on top, this is the best part. He told me that the Hitler Youth was misunderstood because people give them shit for burning books. But he's like, actually, it's good that they're burning those books because those books promoted homosexuality, so they should be doing it. And I'm like, what? Like, how do you get to this point? I asked my mom, I'm like, hey, I got a couple questions for you. And I don't know if this is like some kind of like elaborate joke being played on me or what. I want you to tell me, does he actually believe these things? Number one. And two, should I be afraid for my safety? She answered the first question, yes, he does actually believe these things. And she didn't answer my second question. She didn't. She didn't have an answer for me if I should be afraid for my safety or not. And then she called me herself the next day and got angry at me and railed off on me. Like he's so hurt that you would think that he would kill you. I'm like, he told me that he thinks people like me should be killed. If not, I should just be property to somebody else. And you agree that that's what he thinks. So it's like, what else am I supposed to think here?
Of course, this man is pushing the idea of traditional gender roles while he freeloads off of his working girlfriend and needs her to chauffeur him over state lines because he's too dysfunctional to have his own driver's license or vehicle.
She drives him from Pennsylvania. My mom goes down to Pennsylvania from Chicago, picks him up, drives up here. When he needs to go home, drives him back, drives herself back up here. He doesn't drive. He doesn't have his own car.
What a catch.
Yeah, it's like he's the one that thinks that women shouldn't even be working.
Essentially, the man can't function without a woman. You gotta love the irony.
I think the best part, though, when I actually did end up meeting this guy in real life, my mom got promoted into a very lucrative position. She has a very good job right now. They gave her a diploma. And for her ceremony, my grandma flew in from Arizona, and she had no idea what was going on. By this point, it had been like 6 months that I had known about this guy. Grandma wasn't even told that she was divorcing my stepdad. She had no idea. She thought they were still together and everything was normal. And she's flying in, and my mom, like, as she's like coming here, oh, hey, by the way, I'm divorcing my husband of a couple years now. And I got this guy coming in. I was excited for it because it was my mom's ceremony. We were going downtown and my grandma was going to be in.
Lori Lightfoot would be greeting each diploma recipient during the ceremony. Lori Lightfoot is, of course, the mayor of Chicago, and she's Black. She's gay, and she's a powerful and brilliant woman. Everything Nova's mom's boyfriend hates.
We're there, and as soon as he finds out that Lori Lightfoot is going to be there, he says something that I'm like, oh my fucking God, please don't. He's like, I'm going to do something. I'm going to start something. I hate her. She's a this and that. She's a gay Black woman. So of course he's got like 3 different insensitive like fucking things to say. He's making comments about how there's a female police officer, about how she shouldn't be a police officer. And then all of a sudden he says, I'm going to get up and go have a smoke. So we're in a ballroom. And there's like glass doors, like you can open them and they go straight to the outdoors there. And he gets up, he walks out, he opens one of those doors, and I'm not even kidding you. Almost the exact second he opened that door and closed it to pull out a cigarette and smoke it, the ceremony started and they locked the doors on him. So the entire time he's just staring. He's got his hands like over the glass like this, like looking in like that. And it's like, it was so perfect. Like he deserved that 100%. He just got locked out of the ceremony. And we were all saved. Like, I was like so angry when he said he was going to do something. My mom's ceremony for a great job to all these other people that worked hard. Like, you don't have to like Lori Lightfoot. A lot of people don't. Don't ruin this for other people just because you're a fucking racist.
Later, Nova took everyone out for lunch on her.
He complained the whole time, saying his stomach hurts. Like, my stomach hurts. I don't want to eat any of this food. Okay, then don't. Then I don't pay for you. Good. Don't order anything. And he tells my grandma something, and I think like she was so shell shocked when we got back in the car because my mom took him from the lunch place, and I took my grandma back to her hotel. And on the whole way towards the place where we were having lunch, I told my grandma what was going on. I'm like, this guy thinks gay people should be killed. He thinks women shouldn't have any rights. He's a racist. I don't know what else to say to you. He likes Hitler. And so he gets up, and at some point, I hear something absolutely insane come from the other side of the table with him and my mom. He says something about right-wing utopia. And my grandma's looking at him like, what's going on here? So he gets up, and I don't know how it led to this. I don't really remember because it just happened in like a second. They get up to leave, and he looks down at my grandma who's sitting at the table still, and he's doing this with his hands. He's like, some people are too stupid to know that they shouldn't have any rights. Fascism is for everyone. And then he just leaves. And yeah, so he tells her that we need fascism and all this crazy stuff. And my grandma was like so afraid. She's never been exposed to somebody like that before in her entire life, probably. I don't know. Unfortunately, I'm used to crazy internet people. I see them all the time. Clearly, my mom does too. The next day, I meet up with my grandma for breakfast to kind of just like talk about everything, like in depth for a little bit. And she tells me that morning, he was talking shit about me to my mom. He told her that I have bad ideologies. I have bad ideologies, and that my mom needs to cut off all contact with me. That's a very common, like alt-right or Nazi or extremist kind of tactic, is to just, get rid of all of your family, forget about them. Your new family is Adolf Hitler or whoever the hell. I don't know. So to me, I'm just like, I'm not going to let him have that.
Nova can't make sense of what her mother sees in this man.
The thing that gets me about him sometimes is that he hates atheists. He hates atheists, and I've always known my mom to be an atheist, almost kind of militant as an atheist sometimes. Like, I'm not like that. Like, I don't really care what people believe in. I just don't want it in my goddamn government, that's for sure. But it's like, he hates atheists. He got mad at me for being an atheist. And he told me that the funniest thing, he told me I wasn't raised right because I'm an atheist. And I'm like, you're trying to date my mom. Like, my mom who raised me, it's like, you're trying to date her and you tell me that she didn't raise me right.
From everything that Nova has told me about this man, it honestly seems like he doesn't like anything at all except Bud Light and cigarettes. And with the latest controversy with Anheuser-Busch, he probably doesn't even like Bud Light anymore.
He also talks shit about all of her hobbies. Like, she likes metal. He says he hates metal. I mean, I don't care for death metal myself, but it's like, it seems kind of malicious the way he talks about it. Like, he really wants to just put her down. My boyfriend actually came over to her house to help move some of her stuff to my place. And he kind of sees exactly what I'm seeing, because this guy has he throws temper tantrums. He does. There's a point where we were loading some stuff into my car, and he goes, my head fucking hurts. I need a fucking Bud Light right now. And he's crying like, I can't pick this box up because I need a Bud Light. My head hurts. And my mom just gives into it.
This man has indicated plans for Nova too.
I don't agree with my stepdad doing this, but because this stuff really drove him like actually mentally insane. Like, he had episodes where he was like in the hospital because of the kind of arguments that my mom and him were getting into over this. But he got this like device where he could like see her messages and stuff. And I don't particularly agree with that, but in some ways, knowing what he was able to find was a bit interesting to me. One of the things that he found was that my mom's now Nazi boyfriend was talking about how he wants to indoctrinate me into right-wing ideology. He's like, I'm a good kid who just needs to be put in her place, is what he said.
Nova's mom and her charming partner soon decided to move in together. During their move, Nova offered to care for some of her mom's more interesting belongings.
My mom, for whatever harebrained reason, bought into his prepper shit. Like, he's also like a prepper. He likes to brag about how redneck he is and about how he goes hunting. And he's like, I get my own meat. No, you don't. You go to Buffalo fucking Wild Wings all the time. It's like, that's what you do. You don't hunt. And but he has all this hunting gear and acts like he's a redneck, and he likes to role play. It's like, you're from Philadelphia. But he convinced my mom that they needed to buy chickens all of a sudden. So they have chickens, and they had just bought them in December, right when they were in the middle of moving. These poor chickens are going to get wrapped up in all this stuff. And I told my mom, like, I felt bad for the chickens more than anything. I told her, if you want the chickens to have a place to stay, I could take them in, I guess. I took care of her chickens for like a month. I don't know what else to say. And my dad, he wasn't mad at me. He was just so mad at the fact that my mom's life is such a wreck that there's chickens in his basement now.
At one point, Nova discovered that her mom had fielded a strange proposition from one of her weird neo-Nazi friends.
There was someone who they hang out with. Really, they just keep the guy around and make fun of him, which I almost want to pity this guy, but just what I know about him, I don't think I should. But he is my age, and he was in a Discord group that my mom was in for white supremacists. Who would have guessed? And he has, like, I don't know, I guess he has, like, autism or whatever. And according to her, I don't know, like, if that's true or not. They probably just call him that just because to them it's, like, super funny to call people, like, autistic all the time. But they just dunk on him. And sometimes he says some, like, really strange things, which I kind of get why you might be like, that's weird. One thing she said to me was that this guy offered her $30,000 for my hand in marriage because he wants a white wife who will have white babies. And I'm like, what in the fucking world? Like, of course my mom said no to him because she's not that far gone. But, like, that's just, like, the kind of people she hangs around. Like, these very strange people. Like, he thinks that he can just hand her $30,000 and get himself white babies and a wife that'll, do everything for him.
But the scariest moment for Nova by far was the discovery of an assault rifle.
So my half-brother gets in contact with me. He tells me he was still at my mom's old house at this point. Dan, my half-brother. And he says, hey, so this guy is at our house again. He's not supposed to be here. He's at our house again, and he left an AR-15 in our house. And he's like, I feel threatened because he knew that this guy thinks that LGBT people should be killed. So I'm like, okay. I call my mom and I say, hey mom, can you explain to me why there's an AR-15 in your house? And I was giving her a perfect opportunity to just calmly explain, we own this gun. Like, we just own it. I don't like it. I don't have to like it. But if she just explained it to me, I've been like, okay, whatever. Just letting you know, some people are afraid. So just, don't push people. Like, don't do that to people. But instead she just goes, who told you that? I'm like, it doesn't matter who told me. It just matters to me that there's an AR-15 in the house. Like, I want to understand what's going on here so I don't end up hearing that somebody just got shot and killed. And she doesn't have a real answer to me. That whole ordeal was just, like, really upsetting to me because she had no consideration or care for the fact that her own child that's living with her feels threatened. And is like, why is mom having this guy that thinks I need to be killed? Why is he in the house, number one? Number two, why is he in an assault rifle that can kill multiple people in one go? It was scary to me because, like, all of a sudden he would just burst out and start swearing. He would throw something across the room. And it's like, what happens when the doors are closed? Like, nobody else is around besides him and my mom. Because he would yell at her in front of us and swear at her. And it's like, I don't want this guy to beat my mom. I really don't.
Nova's attempts to push back have been futile.
You know, that doesn't register to people like her. It really doesn't. Like, to them, that's just, you're being silenced. You know, the liberal elite or whoever the heck, like whatever villain it is silencing you, or they're brainwashing people to silence you.
Nova's mother has already faced many consequences for her vile new interests.
She told me she got doxxed. And the reason she got doxxed was because someone in her group of anti-Semites found out that my great-grandmother marched in the civil rights movement alongside a Jewish person. And they said that that's a reason for you to be doxxed. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, well, what happens when you dox someone? You not only get their first and last name and their phone number, their address, where they work, you get their family members' first name and last name and phone numbers and where they work and where they live. I don't want my fucking information out there because some anti-Semite is mad that my grandmother marched in the civil rights movement.
She also seems to be doing her best to destroy the few relationships she has left.
My half-brother doesn't want anything to do with my mom and is living at one of his friends' houses just to be safe. She told me that she only has 3 people left in her life. That guy, his son, and me. That's what she said. She doesn't even trust her other kid anymore, I guess, because he's trans and doesn't want to live with somebody that thinks trans people should be killed. I guess that's bad. I guess that makes you a bad person in her eyes.
Nova believes her mom's job is adding to her mother's mental health problems.
As I've learned over time, that's kind of a part of her problem, is that she's, you know, she has all these problems with unaddressed trauma, and then she's adding on more trauma with this job of hers. One thing she told me is that when she was like 16 years old, she was hanging out with a group of kids like her age. They were smoking marijuana because that's what you do when you're into rock and roll in the 90s. So she was, you know, stalked by this police officer, and because she was hanging out with these kids that smoked weed, and he followed her home. And he did this on multiple occasions, followed her home and told her that he was going to rape her. And even though I don't know if he actually did, but I know that happened at least. And that, like, he doesn't have to have done it for that to have been sexual assault. It was, you know, to be 16, followed by a police officer to your house for what? Smoking weed? Who cares? But that's the kind of relationship she's had with authority, with, you know, and her thing is she's trying to justify why things like that happen to her. She also never knew her dad. I don't know who my grandfather is on that side. I don't know his name. I don't know what he looks like. I've never even really thought about him until my dad said something, and he's like, yeah, you know, I think the reason why you've just never really heard about him is because, you know, my grandma would tell my mom, like, every time my mom was like, who's my dad? She would be like, he's a bad guy. He's a very bad guy. That's all she would tell her. And I think my mom knows it. I think I know it. I think we can all kind of tell that man definitely, like, raped my grandmother at some point. And my mom, I think, is afraid that she's the result of it.
Nova feels as though this lingering trauma could be shaping her mom's ideologies.
I think that's why she's eating up a lot of pro-life stuff now, too. I mean, at the end of the day, it's my grandma's choice if she does it or if she doesn't want to, if something like that happens to her. But my mom probably hears a lot of the rhetoric like, hey, if someone's raped and they don't want to have a kid, they don't have to. And a lot of women probably are going to make that choice. And she probably thinks to herself, well, that means that I wouldn't exist. So she buys into a right-wing ideology that tells her that the answers are simple. Some people are just inherently bad. Some people just need to be under control. We just need to have an authority to just blanket, you know, have control over everything. And there's nothing that they can do about that. a lot of right-wing ideologies are about demonizing emotion and demonizing feeling. And to someone like her, that's probably comforting, because then it means that she can push all of her trauma away. She can just forget it. Like, it's not important, because feelings aren't important. People who have feelings are just irrational and wrong and don't need to be listened to. Even though, like, that's the most human thing you can have is feelings.
Nova worries about her mom's safety.
The thing is that's scary is that someone like him, who doesn't believe women are human, is the kind of person that beat their wives. You know, I don't want to turn my back and find out my mom is being beat by this guy. Who knows if it's even happening right now? Because the way he treats her, like my boyfriend said, like, you know, I don't like the way he talks to your mom. Like, you see it too.
What does your relationship look like with her now?
I haven't talked to her in a hot minute. I have to be honest. She still has stuff in my house. She does. And I'm kind of wondering, like, should I go out of my way to contact her and be like, hey, you still have things here. Do you want to come get them? It's been like 2 months now that she hasn't come over to get anything. And I'm just like wondering, like, maybe this is it. Like, she's ready to just cut me off. It wouldn't be the first time I thought she was going to cut me off, because I don't know what kind of mood she's in. I don't know if she's going to be on, like, if we're cool, like, she's going to be nice to me, or if we're going to be in the phase of her being, like, super political, and it's all, like, negativity. It's all hate. It's all, what are you going to do when Black Lives Matter comes in and breaks down your door? You don't have any guns to kill them. And, of course, she says it a lot more racist. It's not Black Lives Matter. It's, like, slurs and stuff, like, because every Black person is Black Lives Matter to her. I don't know. It's just fucked up. People have told me, like, you shouldn't be talking to her anymore. And it's like, I have still done that. I'm wondering what that could be myself. I guess it's kind of like, I can only know when it happens, because, like I said, she's already called me a degenerate to my face. She's already brought an assault rifle into the situation before. I am already aware of her being doxxed. I'm already aware of her going to the Fash Bash. I'm already aware of her having a white supremacist card, like membership card. I'm aware of this guy that she's with and all of the, you know, shenanigans he's up to. And yet still I'm like, I guess maybe I'm a little desensitized. Like, people have told me before that I'm a little desensitized to craziness, because she's like not even she's one of many, like, insane people I've met in my life. So it's like, I just have, like, this tolerance for it.
I asked Nova if she had any hope for the future.
It's hard to say it sometimes, but things don't get better sometimes. It really doesn't. Sometimes it goes down this path, and people need to be ready for the Nazi shit to really start to seep in, because that's where my mom is. Some ways, I kind of think at some point this will end, because this guy doesn't really seem to like my mom that much either. Like, he screams at her all the time. He calls her stupid, and he denigrates, like, everything she likes. He was talking, like, to my boyfriend when he was over. He was telling him about how he was going to move to South Dakota because there's a factory there, and he's going to work at the factory. And I don't know what kind of factory it is in South Dakota, but it's like, you just spent all of this time involving yourself in my mom's life, made her sell her house, made her divorce her husband, kick out everybody else that was living there. She has a new house, and now you're just talking about going to South Dakota. My mom isn't going to relocate. Her job is tied to the government of Chicago. Like, it's tied to the city. She can't relocate like that.
Have you ever considered getting your mom to do, like, one of those 23andMe DNA tests to see if there's any Jewish in you guys?
I don't know if I want to do that. I think her whole world would, like, fall apart if she found out that we did. Like, even if it's just like a 0.01%, like, that's enough to her.
Many thanks to Nova for chatting with us. Our conversation was a good 2 hours long, and we could have gone way longer if we didn't have an appointment after. She was engaging, extremely smart, and I enjoyed every minute talking to her. I truly hope your mom, Nova, eventually sees the error of her ways before any more damage is done. Of course, in a better world, every white supremacist would change their mind and realize the harm that they're doing. But that's just not our world. All we can do is educate ourselves, raise our kids with love instead of hate, and hope that one day our species grows out of this. Until then, be sure to send us your stories at porthosmedia.net/qdropped. We want to know about the extremists in your family. We'd also love to thank our patrons for making this episode possible. Our patrons all get access to bonus clips from most of our episodes, as well as ad-free versions of each episode, updates on the podcast, and the state of my own family and its ongoing issues with QAnon, and much more. Be sure to sign up at the link in the show notes. Next week, we speak to Kodiak. His QAnon father has been preparing for the end of the world with weapons, foreign currency, and a sudden fear of drag queens. Be sure you're subscribed to the show on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube to be notified when that gets uploaded. Thanks for listening.